What's up everybody, welcome back. So in the last episode we started the weapons, and today we are going to continue by setting up the tracing. So we're going to set up the overlap traces and also the event or the function that actually fires the traces. So that's what we're going to do first. Let's go to the data folder for the weapons and open our weapon component. And in the last episode we created the empty function fire weapon bullet trace. So we're going to open that up and set it up. And the first thing we need is an actual point where we want to shoot at. So we're going to get our owning controller from here. And from the owning controller, we can get the focus actor. So the actor we are currently focused on. And first of all, let's make sure this is valid. So we're going to drag off the focused actor and look for an is valid node, plug it in. Then from the focus actor, so that's actually our player character that we're going to shoot at, we're going to get the root component. And the root component from the character is the capsule component. So if we get the world location from the capsule component, then we actually fire at the center of our character. So let me open up the third person character. So we're grabbing the root component, the first component in here, and this actually has the origin in the center of the capsule. So right now we are firing basically at the crotch of the player. So we want to increase that a little bit, make it a little bit higher. So I'm simply going to add a vector to it. And then on the z-axis, I'm going to raise it up about 30 units. So we're actually firing at the character's chest. So that's the aim point, and we're going to promote this to a variable for now, a local variable. So this only exists inside of this function, a local aim point, and plug it into the isValid pin. After that, we want to check if this weapon is a shotgun. So we're going to add a branch in here. And let's see. No, we don't have the bool yet. So we're going to create a new variable, a normal, not a local one. And this is called isShotgun to simply check if it's a shotgun or not. Plug it in over here. And we're going to do the false pin first. So at this point, we are firing a normal weapon like a pistol or a rifle or something like that. And we're going to use a multi-line trace by channel. And I'm using a multi-line trace because then we're also are able to set up bullet penetration. And if we use a blocking trace, then we can only hit one target at once. So that's why we're using a multi-line trace. We do need to make sure that we set up the trace channel correctly to make this work, but we're going to get back to that later. So we want to get the start and the end location for our trace. The start location is the muzzle socket of the weapon. So that's going to be a variable. And that's going to be the name of the muzzle socket. So we're going to add a variable muzzle socket, and that's a name type. We can drag it in and then get a socket location. Okay. And the target is self, because the AI component is a skeletal mesh component by its own. So we don't need to hook up a target, that's good. This is the starting point of our trace. And the endpoint is a unit direction vector that starts at the muzzle point. So we're going to drag off here and do a unit direction vector. Oh. And we're going to grab the vector to the aim point. So we're going to plug in the local aim point. And then we also want to be able to add a little bit of weapon spread, probably. Otherwise the AI is going to be that accurate. So from here, what we could do is add a random unit vector in degrees. So a random unit vector cone in degrees. And you can also add an elliptical cone if you want to make the spread more horizontal or vertical. Then you will be able to set it up like an ellipse. And otherwise it's simply a cone shape. So I'm going to use the cone in degrees. And then for the cone half angle, I'm going to drag off and promote it to a variable. And that's the spread of the weapon. So spread. And then the return value, we want to multiply it so we actually fire in the distance. So we're going to multiply, right click the lower pin and convert it to an integer. and then simply add a high number like 100,000, or if you have a really big open level, maybe even 1,000,000, but that's quite a lot. So I'm going for 100,000 over here, and this is going to be the endpoint of the trace. So for now, I'm not going to worry about the trace channel because that's not going to work like we want to anyway. I do want to set up the draw debug type so we can actually see the traces. I'm going to set it to for duration and then lower the draw time. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a lot of traces. So maybe 2 seconds or something, and that should be good. And then we simply want to go to a return node over here. So add a return node, and our weapon fired is true because we just fired a shot. So let's add it over here, set it to true. And that reminds me, we want to go back to the beginning over here where we have the isValid node. And if our focus actor is not valid, we're going to hook up the return node and weapon fired is false. So make sure we have this one in place as well. And then we can go take a look at the shotgun branch. And that's actually quite similar to this one. So we can grab the multi-line trace by channel, paste it over here. If we fire a shotgun, we simply want to trace the same way. So we can grab the start and the end location as well. And simply hook those up. But then after we fired, we are going to increase our shot count. So a shotgun fires multiple shots or pellets. And we want to count them and make sure that we fire more of them. So we're going to create a new local variable and call that local shot count. So that's similar to the burst count. This is the variable that we are going to increase. And then we have a variable on the actual primary data asset, and that's called the pellet count of the shotgun. And that's the variable we're going to compare against. So first we're going to grab the local variable and increment it. Hook it up over here. And after we increment it, we're going to check if we are still inside of the correct range. So we're going to add a branch and check if the current local shot count is greater than or equal to our pellet count. So the pellet count of the weapon. If this is true, then we want to fire, if this is false, we want to fire another trace. So we're going to hook this one back up to the multi-line trace by channel. And if this is true, then we are done firing this shot for the shotgun. So we can grab the true pin and hook it up to the return node over here. So for now, this is our bullet trace function, and we want to add some stuff over here later to make sure that something happens if we actually hit something. But for now, this should work. So let's compile and save it. And the first thing we want to do is take a look at our trace channels. So we're going to use overlapping traces to make sure that we can set up bullet penetration. And to make it work, we cannot have a trace channel that's blocking. So our trace needs to be set to overlap as well. A blocking trace will not register on a multi-line trace. So what we want to do is go to our project settings, edit project settings, and go to the collision tab over here. First, we want to set up a new trace channel. So let's click the button over here. We're going to call this our bullet trace. And the default response is going to be overlap. So it will register everything, and click accept. Then we have the presets over here. We can expand them. And a character actually has a collision capsule and a character mesh. And we want to trace against our character mesh because that's just more natural and more fair. So the capsule is always bigger than the actual mesh. So the character mesh uses the preset for a pawn, and that's also object type pawn. And okay, so did I say capsule? The capsule is using the pawn preset, and the character mesh is using the character mesh preset. And both of them are the pawn object type. So that's why we need the new trace channel to make this even work. So we have it set to overlap by default, and there are a few presets that we want to adjust. So we have no collision over here. If we double click it, then you will see the bullet trace is set to overlap. We want to make sure we don't register anything that has no collision. So we're going to set it to ignore and then accept. And we want to do the same thing for the pawn preset. So as I mentioned, this is the capsule component and we don't want to hit the capsule with our bullet trace. So we're going to set it to ignore as well. And then the same thing for the spectator. So we don't want to be able to shoot spectators. So ignore our bullet trace. The invisible wall, ignore. Invisible wall dynamic, also ignore that one. And then triggers, we don't want to be able to hit trigger volumes and things like that, so we're also going to ignore that. And the last one is the UI, also set that one to ignore. So that's the default setup in the project settings that we need. And now we want to double check the collision on our AI and on the player character just to make sure. So let's go to the guard folder, open the guard AI first. And if we look at the capsule component, we want to scroll down and we changed this in the beginning of the episode, I think, to make sure that we could hit it with our previous trace. So what we want to do now is simply set this back to the pawn class over here, and then it should have bullet trace to ignore. So make sure this looks like so. And then go to the character mesh, and this should have the character mesh preset, and that should have the bullet trace set to overlap. So that should be good. Let's compile and save. And let me see. Oh, I think we also want to enable overlap event. Let me quickly double check, but I'm screwing up my example over here. Bear with me for a second. So the guard character mesh and check the collision. No, that should actually be good. Yeah, that should be good. Okay. Oh yeah, this is the guard. So we do actually want to set it up, I think. Bear with me for another sec, just to make sure. I'm sorry. So let me double check this over here. No, this should actually be good. Okay, so we're not going to enable overlap events on the mesh. This should be good to go. Then we're going to check our player character as well. So let's open up our blueprints third person character. And in here again for the capsule component, we want to make sure it's set to pawn. So this still is by default. And for the character mesh, it should be character mesh. So that's good to go as well. And now we do have a small issue with the tracing of the player, but that's not actually what this series is about, because the aiming of the player is also not working like it should and things like that. So I'm not going to worry about it too much, but to make sure that we can still actually hit our AI, we want to go to the line traces and we want to set them to use the camera trace. And if you want to do it more properly, then you want to turn these ones into multi-line traces and then add a for each loop over here for each hit. But for our purpose, this should work fine. We are focusing on the AI weapons, and that's what we're actually setting up over here. Okay, so we have all of that stuff set up, and now we can actually go inside of the fire weapon event and finish the bullet tracing. So let's go back to our weapon component, and inside of the fire weapon bullet trace, for the multi-line trace by channel, we're going to select our new bullet trace, and it doesn't show up over here, so let me simply close it down and then reopen it, and then we should be good to go. There we go. So we have bullet trace over here for the shotgun and also bullet trace for a non-shotgun. So make sure you change both of those. And at this point, we want to make sure that our tracing is working. So we're going to make sure that AI automatically starts firing at us after we spawned into the level. So let's go to the event graph and let's go all the way to the end of event begin play. Over here, I'm going to add a small delay. Something like 3 seconds or something. And after those 3 seconds, the AI will start firing. So I'm simply going to add a little print to make sure that we know when that happens. And let's call this start fire. So, and I'm gonna make it green and make sure it stays on screen a little bit longer so we don't miss it. And then we're gonna call our fire weapon event. So normal one, fire weapon, and enable the boolean. So we're gonna start firing. Now this will only aim at the player as soon as we have an actor in focus, and that will only happen if we are in combat. So we need to make sure that we trigger the combat state by either walking towards the AI or shooting at him, and at that point he will actually start firing at us. And we are almost able to test it. All we need to do is make sure that we set up some defaults for the variables over here. Later, we're going to populate all of these variables by using our data asset, but for now, simply set up some defaults in here so we can test it. So the current burst fire count, we don't want to set that. The weapon type should be trace, so that's good to go. The fire time, let me see, what weapon do we have in here? We don't have anything in here, but we have a weapon assigned to our guard. And that's the shotgun. So let's make the fire time something like 1.5 seconds maybe. Then I'm not going to make it a burst weapon, so burst count is going to be 0. Auto fire is going to be true, and that's simply because it will keep firing in a loop, so it's easier for testing for now. But we can make burst fire shotguns that are automatic or single shot. We can combine anything over here if we want to. We don't need a burst delay because it's not a burst weapon. It is a shotgun, so we're going to enable the shotgun boolean. The muzzle socket is going to be called muzzle flash, if I'm not mistaken. So let's call this muzzle flash. And we can check it by going to our weapons folder. And then open up our shotgun. And it should have a socket already in place. So that's the muzzle flash socket. So we want to make sure we copy this name and don't have any spelling errors. So that's the muzzle socket default. And then the spread, let's make it something about 8 maybe. It's a bit much for a shotgun, but we can see it's working then. And the pellet count is the amount of bullets in one shot. So for this shotgun, I'm going to set it to 6. And then we should be good to go. Compile and save and hit play, and let's see what happens. So as I mentioned, after 3 seconds he will try and start firing. We see the event start fire. But only if we are actually in combat we will see the traces, and that's what's happening now. And you can see the traces are overlapping, so we have the green squares where we hit them, but the line stays green, so it can detect multiple actors or impacts or however you want to call it. And the spread is also working, so that's good to go. Now if we test this with 2 players, then we will only see traces on the server, and that's normal. So the server is doing the tracing and the client simply gets the result of those traces from the server. So that's why if we test it with 2 players, we are only going to see the traces for the host and not for the client. So nothing to worry about it over there. That's how it should be. And what we could do, for example, is change this into an automatic rifle that's bursting. So I'm not going to worry about the mesh for now. We could change the mesh if we okay, well, change it, why not? So let's change it to the rifle over here. And then if we change some defaults, so let's say the weapon type is trace, the fire time, we want to lower that because this is a rifle. So let's say something like 0.1 second. And then we're going to make it fire 4-round burst. And we're going to keep it auto fire. The burst delay is going to be 1.5 seconds. So after a burst, he's going to wait 1.5 seconds before he fires a second burst. The shotgun is false. And then the spread and the pellet count, we can keep that in place. That doesn't really matter. So now if we hit play and we try again, we should have a burst rifle. And you can see it's firing 4 shots really fast after each other, and then it waits for 1.5 seconds and fires another one. And we can turn it into a shotgun if we want to. So enable the bool, and then it will fire an automatic burst shotgun. So things like that, we can set all of that up in the data asset later. So this is good to go. Now there are a few things that we might want to take a look at. The first thing is the meshes in the level over here. So let me just grab one player. Let me see. So if the AI is firing at us, we are actually getting all of the impact. So that's good to go. I think in my other project I had some issues with that. And it wasn't actually registering all of the impacts. And you can double check the collision for the meshes in the third person example level to make sure those are set up correctly. So you want to take a look at the collision in the details panel over here. Or you can also take a look at the collision that's set up inside of the static mesh asset. And then there's collision over here as well. So if you have trouble with collision somehow inside of the third person example project, then those are things that you want to check. And there's also one other small thing that we can take a look at. So right now the AI will continue firing if he's dead. So we can actually take care of that pretty easily and make sure that's working like we want to. So if we go into the actual card, so that's the character, the GDR card, and in here we have the server die function, and in here we want to add a little bit. So we can simply grab our weapon component over here. Let's do it right before we detach the component. And if we simply set our variable back to false, then that will make sure the weapon stops firing. So set AI fire weapon. And set this one to false. So that's the same thing as the fire button pressed boolean on a character, for example. And this will make the firing stop. Compile and save. Well, we can hit test quickly. So right now he's shooting at us, and if I kill him, he stops shooting. So that part is working as well. Let's make sure we turn off his shotgun so we don't have a burst fire shotgun and things like that. That's good as well. I think we are also going to take a look at the tracing the hit results, and then we are probably done for this episode. So to finish set up the weapon tracing, we're going to go back to the weapon component, fire weapon bullet trace. And as I mentioned, we want to do something with these out hits. And for that, we are going to create another function. So let's create a new function and call this one process trace hit. Process trace hit. Oh, there we go. And we're going to give it an input, and that's an array of hit results. So let's call this all hits and then turn it into a hit result structure. And that needs to be an array. Then for this array, we're going to grab a for each loop, but we're going to use one with a break this time. So for each loop with break, plug it in over here. And the first thing we want to do in this for each loop is check the current penetration of this shot to determine if we actually want to use this hit result or not. So we need a local variable, and that's our current penetration. So let's create a new local variable, current penetration. That's integer, and obviously I misspelled it again. There we go. And we also have a variable for that on the weapon later, and that's the maximum penetration. So let's create a normal variable, and that's max penetration. And that's also an integer. So the first thing we're going to do is check if our current penetration is still is greater than our maximum penetration. Plug it in and grab a branch over here. And thank you. And if this is true, then we're going to simply break the loop. So there's no need to keep checking all of the hit results if they are outside of our quote-unquote range anyway. So the bullet is not going to reach it because it was stopped by the bullet penetration. So we're going to break the loop. And if this is false, we want to break our hit result so we can work with that. So let's break the hit result over here. Inside the hit result, we have the hit actor. So we're going to drag off here and determine if we actually hit a valid actor or not first. Plug it into the false bin. If we didn't have a valid actor, we're going to assume we still want to count towards our bullet penetration, and we also want to probably play an impact fix. So we're going to create a local variable again, and that's an array of hit results. So let's drag off the array element, promote to local variable, and these are going to be the local valid hits. And then I'm going to get rid of the setter and turn it into an array. So we have an array of hit result structures again. I'm going to drag it in over here and I'm going to add an item to it. So this goes over here if we don't have a valid actor. And then plug in the hit result from the array element. And we also want to increment our current penetration. So we're going to drag in our local variable and increment it. So that's all we want to do if we don't have a hit actor that's valid. And if we actually do have one, we want to make sure that we only hit that actor once with a single trace. So it can happen if we fire from the side that we hit an arm and then the side of the chest and then the arm at the other side as well. So then we have 3 impacts that refer to the same character. And if we simply deal damage to all of them, then we also deal triple the damage. So we want to prevent that. And it can also happen if a mesh is hollow, then he will get an enter and an exit hit at the trace, for example. So you will have 2 hits when you are firing at the chest. So those are things that you don't want to count towards the bullet penetration, at least in my opinion. And you also want to deal damage once. So that's what we're going to set up over here. And to do that, we need to have another local array. And that's the local hit actors. And that's an array of actors. So simply actor object reference. And we're going to drag in that array. And we're going to add a unique item to it. So add unique. And this will make sure that if the actor is already in the array, it will not get added a second time. And if that happens, the integer over here will return as -1. If the actor is not in the array, this will return the new index of the actor. So that's what we're going to use. First of all, make sure we plug in the hit actor over here from the hit result. So as I mentioned, we want to check if this is greater than or equal to 0. So greater than or equal to, grab a branch. If this is false, we already have a hit for this actor registered, so we're not going to do anything, and we're also not going to count towards the penetration, so the false bin is not going to have anything connected. If this is true, we're going to add it to our local valid hits array again, so we're going to drag it in, plug it in over here, and grab the hit from the for each loop. Then at that point we want to apply damage as well, probably. So we're going to use the built-in system from Unreal. So we can simply do apply point damage. And make sure we hook everything up. So the damaged actor is the hit actor from the hit result. Plug that in over here. For the base damage, we need a variable on the weapon, and we don't have it yet, so we're going to promote it to a variable, and that's simply the damage of the weapon. The hit from direction, we can use the hit result and then use a unit direction vector. So we are going to grab the location from the hit result, that's the endpoint, and we're going to grab a unit direction vector towards the start of the trace. And the return value of this is the hit from direction. So we can plug that one in over here. Hit info, we can grab it from the for each loop, plug it in. Then we have the event instigator. So that is actually the controller. And we have a reference to our AI controller over here, the owning controller. So we can plug that in. The damage causer, that's the actual AI. So that's probably the possessed pawn, but we don't really need to worry about it. And we also don't have a reference to it. We could add a reference to ourselves. So then this is an actor. Oh no, we can't because we are a component. So well, we could do get owner. Why not? Let's make everything correct. So we can hook up a get owner over here. Then we don't need to actually have a reference, so that works. And we're not using damage type classes, so for now we're gonna leave this empty. We get the actual damage that is applied returned over here. We're not gonna worry about it for now. All we want to do is increment our current penetration. So let's do that over here as well. So this is all we're going to do for the process trace hits, and this will make sure that the bullet penetration works for the line traces, so we will not register anything outside of our maximum penetration. And we are going to add a return node over here. So from the completed pin, we're going to drag off, add a return node, and we actually want to return the array of valid hits. So we can drag it on over here, and then let's rename it. So we have the valid hits returned by this function. Compile and save. We can go back to our fire weapon bullet trace function and plug this in. So let's go over here. Let's do the lower branch first, the no shotgun branch. We're gonna grab our process trace hits, plug it in over here. So the out hits are all of the hits that we want to process, and then we will get the valid hit returned, and we're going to promote the valid hits to a local variable again. So let's drag off here, promote to local variable, and let's call these local out hits, for example. And we need that for the shotgun branch primarily. So let's hook that up over here. This part is good to go. Now, if we go up to the shotgun branch, we need a tiny bit more room. And first of all, we're going to process the trace hits again. So we're going to call this function and plug it in. And then we want to append our valid hits array to the out hits. So we want to combine those arrays. So let's grab the valid out hits and we're going to append an array to it. Simply combine the arrays effectively and plug it in like so. So in the end, we will have one array of out hits for all of the traces that are fired for the shotgun. So that's good to go, and we are actually going to use the out hits array later, so we're not going to return it over here. We'll be adding something in here later. I just want to make sure we have it set up. So this should be good to go, and currently if we add a point damage event inside of our third person character, we can at least test the damage. So if we go to the damage variable over here, we want to make sure that we have damage set up. So let's make this damage 10 maybe. And for the maximum penetration, I'm going to leave it at 0 for now. So we can only hit one target. But well, testing this is a little bit harder at this moment. We can easily see what happens if we have impact effects playing, for example. So for now, I'm not going to worry about penetration too much. Let's go inside of our third person character, so the actual player character. And in here we want to add the event point damage, so we actually register the point damage that we are dealing from the AI. And all I'm going to do for now is simply print a text. So let's print text. And for this I'm going to format the text. And I'm simply going to say damage and then A, so open bracket A, close bracket. And we can plug in the damage over here and make sure this is red so it stands out a little bit. And 2 seconds on screen, that should be fine. So right now, if we compile and save and have the AI shoot at us, we should register damage with our player. And as you can see, we have damage in the top left So now he's missing, and there he hit us twice, and we have the prints. So that part is working as well. I think for this episode we're gonna keep it at this, and then in the next episode we're gonna worry about how everything looks and sounds. So we're gonna add fire sounds, montages for firing, and probably some impact effects, muzzle flash, things like that. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Later guys and girls, bye bye.